When it comes to raw displays of strength and power, few movements, if any, outstrip the power clean. Consider this lift. China's Shi Zhiyong stepping up to 190 kilos on his opening attempt at the 2019 Worlds and doing... just watch. Wait, what? Let's see that again. That's a 190 kilo power clean by a 73 kilo athlete. For those of you working in make-believe units, that's over 418 pounds by an athlete weighing just over 160. The moment of that power clean, there was an audible gasp and collective intake of breath from the thousands of people in the stands. This was a lift that said, "Excuse me, children, but it's time for a grown-up to play." And rightly so. A finely executed snatch may be prettier, and a full clean allows for more weight. But the power clean is the sledgehammer of lifts, brutally getting the job done without worrying about what it destroys along the way. In this video, we do a deep dive into all things power clean. We look at its history, go over the basics of the movement, and talk with one of the world's top experts in power clean research. Most importantly, we look at why you should use it in your training. Or why you shouldn't use it in your training. Should you use it in your training? We'll get to that. The first recorded use of the term power clean dates all the way back to the first modern Olympics in 1896. Denmark's Viggo Jensen, after lifting 111.5 kilos in the clean and jerk, which was then simply called the two-hand lift, turned to the judges and asked, "Power or not?" Okay, that's not precisely accurate. Getting to the core of the power clean's history is a bit more difficult than I imagined. So the history that I'm about to lay out is tentative and very much a work in progress. That said, we can pin down a timeline of sorts, just with some caveats. First, it's important to make some distinction between the lift itself and the term used to describe it. The movement of bringing a bar to the shoulders predates people calling this a power clean. If you look at some of the early 20th century sources on weightlifting, such as Arthur Saxon's The Development of Physical Power from 1905, it seems clear that the clean portion of the lift could be a power clean. That is, it wasn't necessary or even desirable to go into a full squat when doing a clean. All that mattered was getting the bar to the shoulders. Basically, people were probably doing power cleans well before they were doing full or squat cleans. All of which begs the question, can there be such a thing as a power clean without general use of the full or squat clean? Let's not get too deep into navel-gazing. What seems clear is that people have been doing movements that resemble power cleans for well over 100 years. And probably the two-hand lift that was contested at the first modern Olympics in 1896 featured people doing stuff that looked like power cleans. But at what point does the distinction start to appear in how we talk about and define the lifts? Like, when do people start saying power clean? If we check the Oxford English Dictionary, the definitive historical dictionary of the English language, we find a reference to power clean from the 1956 book Weight Training in Athletics by J. Murray and P.V. Karpovich. The power clean is a clean without moving the feet. The power clean is an excellent movement to develop an all-out high pull. Power cleans are done as though to clean for the press without foot movement. The book also clarifies the distinction between this and other clean variations, noting, for additional pulling exercise, power cleans can be substituted for some of the split or squat cleans. There's even nice little illustrations of the split and squat style cleans, although not of the power clean, sadly. This is also the earliest reference found by Dennis Reno, one of the OG journalists in the sport who's been putting out his Weightlifters newsletter since 1969. Given that the OED is one of the gold standards for the English language, and Dennis Reno is a gold standard of weightlifting newsletters, is that it? Is 1956 the year power clean as we know it enters the lexicon? Well, maybe not. As extraordinary a resource as the OED is, it can miss things, and if they don't know of a source, then it's obviously not included. As an example, the earliest reference they have to the word clean in a lifting context is from 1913. But there are some earlier writings by famed strongman Arthur Saxon, among others, that use the term clean or clean lift in a way that approximates the modern sense of the word. So there probably were earlier sources. We just need to keep looking. But in the absence of textual sources, we can look to oral histories. Weightlifting is young enough that some of the sport's pioneers, who lifted in the 1950s and 40s, are still around to recall those old days of yore. Coach Jim Schmitz, who started lifting in the 1960s and went on to be the U.S. Olympic team coach for the 1980, 88, and 92 Olympics, asked 91-year-old Olympian Pete George about this. Pete George medaled at the 1948, 1952, and 56 Olympics. According to him, the term power clean was in use as early as 1943, which is when he started lifting. Back then, says George, they only did power cleans and split cleans. If you watch a video of the 1956 Olympic trials in San Jose, California, you can see almost all the lifters doing a power clean and press. To sum up, as split cleans and squat cleans became more popular, there was a need to distinguish among the lifts. So by the 1940s, if not earlier, people started using power clean to refer to a clean caught in a shallow front squat. Presumably, shortly after the term's introduction, people also started debates on what counted as power or not. As mentioned, the power clean is a variation of the clean. That is, the lift that brings the barbell from the floor to the shoulders in one continuous movement. In the power clean variation, the bar is received in a shallow front squat position. As expected, there is disagreement on what counts as a shallow front squat. Some people expect a catch with the knee angle around 45 degrees, while others, myself included, are happy to include just about anything caught at or above parallel. The general setup for the power clean should mimic the setup for the clean. There will be variations among athletes based on body types and lifting styles, but the following cues are a reasonable starting point. First, the feet should be about hip width apart. When looking down at the feet, the bar should be passing over the first knuckle of the big toe, or roughly thereabouts. You're probably wearing shoes. Grab the bar about shoulder width or a bit wider. The hips at the setup should be a bit higher than they are in the snatch start position. For many athletes, this will mean the hips are slightly higher than the knees. The arms should be straight with the elbows pointing outward. The shoulders are in line with the barbell or in front of it, slightly, in effect over or covering the barbell, and the head and gaze are neutral or looking up slightly. In the first phase of the lift, the legs are the primary driver. Think of using the legs to push the platform away while keeping the back angle relatively constant. In doing so, the knee angle opens up considerably and the knees move back to get out of the bar's path. Past the knees, the back angle starts to change more significantly, and the so-called second pull, the explosive phase, begins. The athlete continues driving the legs while ultimately using the back, shoulders, and even the arms to propel the weight. Keeping the elbows turned out and the wrists over the bar helps keep the weight close to the body the entire time. When the propulsive phase is finished, the athlete quickly changes direction and moves under the bar to receive it across the shoulders. Ideally, the hands stay in good contact with the bar the whole time. The feet move out slightly, the torso stays rigid, the hips are slightly behind the bar, and the athlete puts on the brakes to aggressively halt the downward trajectory of the weight. Compared to a clean, the main difference is giving the bar greater height and receiving it at a greater height. Ideally, if you catch a power clean that's too heavy, you should be able to simply ride the weight down into a full clean. This doesn't always happen, especially at heavier weights when athletes at all levels tend to throw their feet too wide. But it's something to keep in mind, a platonic ideal of the power clean, if you will. As simple as the power clean is compared to, say, a snatch or a jerk, you still need a competent coach giving you feedback to really refine your technique. But there are a few things to keep in mind that can help fix some common issues. One is something I learned from Dennis Reno. Imagine the thumbs traveling along the body the entire time. Doing so can help keep the bar close and avoid excessive looping or swinging. If your thumbs are getting too far from any part of your body during the lift, then it's safe to say the barbell has also drifted away from you. The second is avoiding an early arm bend or lifting with the arms. This can be tricky to put in practice, but it's worth it. One way to do so is to think of pushing against the bar at the start with the arms, thus actively straightening the arms. Doing so can sometimes help delay any arm bending or pulling until late enough in the lift that it's appropriate to do so. And the less you pull too early with bent arms, the better chance you have at getting your elbows around and in front of you as fast as possible, which is another key to a solid lift. Again, while these tips and guidelines can be a starting point, there is absolutely no substitute for a good in-person coach giving you immediate feedback during training. And speaking of training the power clean, should you power clean? Good question. I'm going to focus primarily on the power clean's relevance in Olympic weightlifting, but we'll touch on its broader relevance in other sports. The power clean is almost certainly the most commonly used of the Olympic lifts by sports other than weightlifting. There's no shortage of videos of impressively heavy power cleans out there by football players and other athletes. Over the course of talking with various coaches and athletes in the past few years, I've encountered two primary strains of thought regarding the power clean. These are broadly summarized and oversimplified as the following. 1. The power clean is a valuable movement for building pulling power, speed, and force that will directly transfer to improvements in the clean. A better power clean means a better full clean. 2. The power clean is of limited use for improving the clean and may even be detrimental because the goal of the clean is pulling the bar only as high as absolutely necessary. A movement that emphasizes more pulling is counterproductive. So don't waste your time. Again, I'm summarizing and oversimplifying for clarity here, but a lot of coaches I've encountered fall somewhere along the spectrum of these two poles. To an extent, this is probably determined by what kind of clean you teach or do. That is, are you trying to pull high and catch high, or are you dive bombing in an effort to wedge yourself under a weight? Both techniques work, and there's overlap, but conceptually, they signify different approaches to the clean. So it sounds like you should use the power clean, except when you shouldn't. And what about percentages? Should you be taking it nice and easy with some light power cleans for velocity, or should you be crushing your collarbone with max effort attempts? In an effort to figure out what makes sense, I called in an expert, Dr. Paul Comfort. Dr. Comfort is a reader in strength and conditioning and program leader for the MSc Strength and Conditioning at the University of Salford. He literally wrote his dissertation on the power clean, in addition to a bunch of other articles on the topic. We talked for nearly 2 hours about the power clean, so if you want to really dive into his views, definitely check out our full interview with him. Here's what he had to say about the power clean.
I think in terms of doing the clean and the power clean, certainly with beginners, you'd probably want to have more time getting into that full depth position to catch and receive the bar. But again, very early on, you might just be focusing more on getting them to fully extend and get through that movement and that pull, which ultimately the pull is the phase which will result in you displacing the bar as high as you can get it. That has to be good.
Yeah.
If that's wrong, your catch and the way you receive the bar is not going to be any good. I think it's really interesting that if you can get people to perform the propulsive phase, so the pull of the lifts, with good technique, that makes it easier to get into that catch position and receive it. But ultimately, for a weightlifter, they have to go full depth to catch it, because the deeper we can get into that squat position to receive the bar, the lower the displacement of the barbell for us to be able to make a successful lift. If you're limited with range of motion, then you've immediately got to displace the bar to a higher percentage of your height. So I think it really is one of those ones where we've got to identify with the athlete, what do they need to work on? The one thing to try and avoid, especially in weightlifters, is doing too much of the power variations.
Yeah.
If they're not as confident, competent and stable in that catch position with the clean and the snatch, because that's ultimately your end goal.
How strong is the correlation between a power clean 1 rep max and a clean 1 rep max for different athletes?
With weightlifters, they're brilliant. They're very, very strong correlations because technically they're so good.
Yeah.
They are nowhere near as good in team sport athletes because you generally find that they will focus more on the power variations.
In weightlifting, and I think some of your research has shown this, that you can get maximal power output, or you do get maximal power output in the power clean and variance in the 60 to 80% range.
Yep, so normally, and it varies, it's plus or minus 10% of the 1RM. There's not normally a significant difference, but a power clean starting from the floor, catching in that sort of shallow squat position, it's around about 80%. And it varies across studies, but it's between 70 and 90, but 80 is sort of appears to be the sweet spot. If it's a hang power clean, it's 70%, but again, plus or minus 10. So it could be as low as 60, it could be as high as 80. If you're going from mid-thigh, it's then 60%, but it could be as low as 50 and as high as 70.
Is there a percentage where you think, here is where Olympic weightlifters or other athletes should focus their power clean training on or variations on?
That is one of those questions where unfortunately you have to say it depends. The loading is really a case of, right, are we optimizing force production or are we trying to maximize movement velocity? And that's sort of now where I've gone more into that sort of way of thinking rather than what optimizes power. Because the end goal isn't always maximizing power. The end goal is, well, we either need the athlete to move more efficiently and effectively and at a higher velocity. So if they can already generate a lot of force, that needs to be the emphasis. Or if they're really quick at performing the movements, but actually they're just not that strong, we need to get more load into them. They need to focus on producing much higher forces because we know they can produce it efficiently.
What ratio of training for the clean should be devoted to the power clean? And I guess a related question is, if we never did power cleans, if we only did pulls and regular cleans, would anybody know?
Yeah, I think in terms of what percentage, it depends where you are in your training cycle, and it depends on your overall goal. If you're wanting to focus on movement velocity, the power clean is going to be a better option because you have to move at a higher velocity to displace the bar high enough to catch it at that higher height. If you're really focusing on force production, then the clean is going to be better because you can lift a heavier load. Or at some points, just pulling variations, just a clean pull from the floor, from the knee, from mid-thigh, wherever it might be, allows you to use a heavier load.
Are you aware of specific cases where you would say, you know what, a pull is just much better? Just forget about the power clean.
There's sort of two ways of looking at it. If you're looking at what they need to train in terms of either force or velocity, if you're doing a pulling variation, we can go above our 1RM. So we can use heavier loads. So to do that for some of your training, to really emphasize force production, to emphasize postural strength and control when you're pulling a really heavy load off the bar. If you're used to pulling really high loads off the floor, even if it is just that first pull, the pull to the knee, actually doing it for a period of training is a really good way of enhancing that strength. But I do think there's a huge amount of benefit in that task. If it's a weightlifter, they still need to do some of those catching variations, and they still need to do some of them full depth, some of them possibly in a power position. So it's really down to you as a coach to say, right, what does this athlete need?
At this point, we've just about wrapped up our little excursion into the power clean. We've looked at its history, gone over the basics of the movement, and heard what an expert researcher has to say on the topic. With that done, I imagine we've cleared up pretty much everything, and there's absolutely no ambiguity about when and how to use the power clean. Okay, there's still a fair amount of ambiguity. What did you expect? But given that, I think we can still say a few things in general about training with the power clean. Just note that this is my take, and you're free to disagree and be wrong. Also, there are some athletes who we never see doing power cleans. Lasha is just one example, and he seems like someone who's got potential. Back to our discussion on the power clean. We'll divide this into beginners and non-beginners. When I say beginners, I'm thinking of people who are still learning the lifts. These are athletes who probably have less than 6 months of experience and who can power clean more than they full clean. What should you do if you're a beginner? Get a good coach and listen to them. If they tell you to power clean, you should do it. If they say don't power clean, don't do it. The power clean is great for beginners to learn the mechanics of the pull and turnover. It's great to train speed and rhythm and timing and positions. I use it with beginners all the time, and I think it's a great way of scaffolding learning the full clean. But it needs to be done under the eyes of a coach. Only a good coach can determine whether your time is best spent on this movement or on others. What if you're not a beginner? Say you're someone with a year or more of experience who's gotten the fundamentals down pretty well. In that case, still get a good coach you trust. At no point will you outgrow the need for a coach. That said, I think power cleans are great for intermediate and advanced athletes for a range of purposes. You can use them to develop pulling power, speed, aggressiveness in the turnover, and postural strength. The lighter load and more limited displacement of the barbell compared to the full clean make them great for reducing workload in a training cycle. They're also a great tool if you need to train around an injury or mobility issue, or just for some variety. And just as important, they look fucking badass. Who's gonna sit here and say Ehab doesn't look like a one-man wrecking crew as he throws this barbell around? Or deny the casual ease with which Lydia turns over 125 kilos into barely a quarter squat? Not me, certainly. Just remember, I can say with like 99.9% certainty that you are not Muhammad Ehab or Lydia Valentin. So do the power cleans in a way that works for you, in a way that your coach approves, and in a way that ultimately works toward improved results in the clean and total. Because you're also probably not Shi Ji-young, which means at some point you're going to have to do a full clean. That's it. We hope you've enjoyed this dive into all things power clean. I had a lot of fun looking into this topic and hearing from people like Paul Comfort, Jim Schmitz, and Dennis Reno. Remember to check out the full interview with Dr. Comfort for much more. As always, thank you so much to our patrons. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, consider heading to Patreon and becoming a supporter. Thanks again, and see you next time.